the entry point for the first topic in our meeting, which is we're coming to an end of our journey. I can't
What a pleasant
believe
journey.
it was
Man,
amazing.
it was
I can't
amazing.
believe that we actually got through the whole book. And at
I
this
am
level
really,
of
really grateful to you guys. I mean, this journey was an experience of my life.
it was really, really amazing. I can't believe like we managed to stick to the book for so long. Like
Yeah, and on schedule too. Like we really didn't miss that much. I thought it was going to like
totally go
several
crazy.
months.
Yeah. No, we actually managed to be kind of, I mean, with one interlude here, an interlude there, we actually managed to stick to the idea. And I think that the first thing, I mean, so we can also kind of schedule what you were talking about, Reza. But I think one thing we should talk about is if we want to do a sort of plenary with presentations, you know, to conclude, and how that could be, because this way we can also know how many weeks free we have to do something else, like with your manuscript and things like this, you know.
Sounds good.
So I don't know what you guys think. Like, should we try something like that and organize like
I think
day
plenary
or...
is great. I think in the plenary, I think we can have a presentation of not sort of a summary of our reading, because I don't think that we have such a summary. Like what do we think that logics of words is to maybe this is too big of a question, but I say it anyway. I mean, there are two things. One is I was thinking about this today. But let me say it in another way. When I finished the book, I thought that something is missing. I thought that probably 2 chapters are missing in the book. Then I thought that probably 1 chapter. Like the fact that you started with formal theory of the subject, which was really heavy on bodies and truths, on events, body and truth. And then 400 pages later, he comes back to body and truth. Like in the formal section, the last 2 formal sections of the book on body, I think for me created a little bit of interruption. I think chapter in body should be read with chapter on subject, or the formal section of the subject should be read with the formal section of body. So I think one thing that in terms of the flow of the book could be done and was not done, I wished it could have been done, was basically a kind of coming back to, now we have learned this, now let's review some of the main concepts in terms of subject and the formalism of subject. So that was one, which I convinced myself, well, a smart reader will go back and read that chapter again and then make sure that these two are in sync. So it wasn't a big deal. But the next one that I thought probably is missing is a chapter on truth. There is no formal treatment of truth in logics of words. So we have a lot by the way of ontology of truth in being an event, but there is no kind of phenomenology of truth, so to speak, like the entire machinery that we have with respect to the new logic. We don't have a treatment of truth. And I don't know at this point whether it is absolutely necessary or not. I feel it is missing. He has a lot of reference at the end of the book to the category of truth, but there is no formal representation of that. Now, why did I say that? And how is it related to the question of plenary? I said that just as an example that, let's say it is my take that probably this book can be supplemented with a chapter on truth. Where does this fit into the overall project that Badiou has, like Badiou has in mind, retroactively? Now Badiou is coming to the end of his career, seemingly. Where does it fit? And where does this fit in terms of its interlocution with other major conversations that are going on? So I think a presentation like this from our group would be good in plenary to other people, see if, what they think, and also invite some other thinkers to also present likewise, present something related to logics of words.
So you would invite other people to present, and you would like, if I understood correctly, you would like to focus on the sort of supplement that you don't think it's developed in logics of words.
Yeah, something like that. And plus the relation of logics of words with being an event and with immanence of truths. And in general, like in relation to the whole project that Badiou has. And I'm not saying that necessarily I present, I'm saying it's an idea that I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something similar. Yeah, sorry.
So just I think one decision, I think maybe the first decision is, I mean, from a practical point of view, is just, will we have other people or just us, or us and 1+1 or something like this, or with how many people from outside the group? This kind of decision, it seems to me like it's a first practical decision about the plenary before the subjects, the treated ideas and all that. It seems to me, at least, like the format.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the difference is quite relevant, because if we invite other people to present, and we organize a plenary of some sorts, there is the whole thing with contacting, finding relevant people who are willing to speak and things. It takes it's a bit of a trouble. And
it will take 1 month plus 1 month organizing if you want to do something with other people, like more than one.
Yeah, because they will have to be kind of made aware and then prepare something. It will take a bit, I think. And and I do think we'll have some trouble, depending on what we expect from this interlocution, to find people with a similar outlook on the book, or who are interested in this book to begin with. That's hard. And then amongst people interested in this book, to find people who are, I mean, doing interesting stuff is not that easy, in fact. I do like the idea of inviting other people, just because I think it's also good to create a bit of network and interlocution. But yeah, I mean, I think it's up to you guys what you prefer. I also think that doing something just amongst us might be, I mean, to do something just for the sake of, we're concluding this group, we're giving like some presentations more as a celebration at the end, and we invite people to listen and debate. That could work as well. Probably nice interlocutors would show up anyway, even if we don't give them presentation time, you know. So I think it has a lot to do with how long we want to wait before we do it. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, what is like, how realistic is this? Would people come to just present? Like, and whom are we asking?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't just as a preface, I wouldn't really discuss like pros and cons of possible interlocutors on our recorded meeting. We leave it to the chat.
Can we ask Badiou to come and present?
I thought of that, but I from what we've heard, right, he's not really doing that well, right? So I'm not sure, but I'm just saying, like, just as a preface, I think that we should keep the gossip about possible people to invite.
Like
to
you guys said, somebody
minimum.
said, Alberto, we asked Alberto Toscano to come. And
yeah, I really like him, and I'd love to have him over. I'm not sure. The last time I spoke with him, he told me he hasn't really been working on this since back on the day when he translated.
Can we ask Zalamea to present?
Zalamea, I think he could be interested. I think I can.
This interests me a lot. So have Zalamea would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really nice talk to him when we were in Prague, and he was very open. I think that it's likely that if he's.
I was shocked. I mean, Zalamea was like a card that I saw when I was at the EGS in 2015. His books or his book on mathematics. I forget the name. The little book.
Printed. Yeah, the synthetic view of mathematics.
Synthetic philosophy of contemporary mathematics.
Yeah, and it was being like they knew that I kind of had the Badiou brand. I was branded Badiouian. So they were saying, "Oh, look, Zalamea is not that." So it's not like every mathematician agree with Badiou and stuff like that. So I didn't know Zalamea at the time. I had the book. I wasn't. Then we met him in Prague, and he had such a great lecture about Badiou and the role that he's playing in terms of marrying philosophy with mathematics and the use of mathematics, and he was very complimentary to Badiou. I was shocked.
Yeah, no, he was very complimentary, but he seems also very accessible. So we could try if you guys want to invite him.
I think Zalamea would be good. Alberto Toscano is really good too. I think, I mean, it's good to even reach out to Badiou. Why not? Like we probably have to send him something, like a short synopsis or something.
Yeah, we could write something and send him the link to our everything
recordings.
That was done and so on.
If we write something, I think the thing we write collectively shall be our presentation in the plenary. Like
that too. Then we are killing two birds with one stone.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah, if we do write something, I mean, yeah.
What do you mean?
I mean, so what JP is saying, following the suggestion, he's saying, yes, let's write something that we are planning to present, but before the plenary, send it to Badiou and say,
yes,
this is our group, this is what, plus a short synopsis of our reading group, and send it to Badiou. Either Badiou reads it and comes, or just reads it and doesn't come, or we don't even know. Doesn't read it at all. We end up presenting the same thing that we write for Badiou.
Yeah, I don't like that idea, guys, because it hides. It's a black box of a lot of work to actually write something together. I mean, we can write him an email tomorrow, like a short synopsis of what we've done, a link to the group, tell him that other people are being invited. Like, I would wait until others are confirmed, so we invite him. But we could invite him in that context and just give him a synopsis of what we're doing. I mean, to actually have a text written collectively, which is like 10 times the work, right? I don't know. I think it's actually more work and not like a streamlining thing. It's actually going to be.
Yeah, perhaps it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it is more work for sure, but it's a pleasing work.
Yeah, I mean, what counts as pleasing work in my book these days is I mean,
I'm already doing a lot of pleasing stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'd love to do it, but I mean, I might just, you guys can do it and I'll just cheer. But probably if we do presentations, I'll do something a bit, I mean, I'll try to get a topic, but I'll be a bit more improvised than something I wrote down. Like, yeah, I don't think I'll have time to do it something like that until early next year. So I don't know. I think that like my main concern is to get it done, like to do something that celebrates the end of it, like the size of this event. I think I'd rather focus on something that is smaller but manageable in a short period of time, so we can start planning something bigger afterwards and so on, rather than try to put all the eggs in one basket and then it just takes too long to organize, requires us to have free time, and it might not be the case. In the new America that's coming after today, we don't know how it is. So
Yeah.
Dennis, did you vote
Yes.
today or before?
Early voting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Is this because of your vote that Texas is up for grabs?
Yeah, it's all my doing.
So I don't know, guys. I mean, we can continue discussing this through the messenger and so on, but my proposal would be, I'm all for trying Badiou. I'm all for trying some nice people, but I probably try to do it in a way that they're the cherry on top of something we can manage on our own, than trying to organize an event that functions for them, you know, and because it might
I agree. That's a good criterion. Yeah.
like, for example, I think that's actually, I can see that as a very nice kind of frame to invite Zalamea, or if he doesn't accept, one other person to be like the main speaker in something where we are the other speakers. Like,
Exactly. This was the model I had in mind. Like, we're not doing like a
Congress.
A seminar or something about Badiou. This would be another project. It seemed like we could do this, but maybe some other time. But as a plenary, I'd say just us and maybe one or two, and the one or two plus, they are only there to mark the fact that it is a celebratory event. Just to mark a difference. Like, it's not just for us discussing like every. So you have, I don't know, a friend of ours, maybe Daniel Tut, maybe, to talk a little bit. So it marks the celebratory aspect. Maybe this is the main gist that I had in mind. Like, and it's better if it's then for that somebody that is approachable, that is accessible. Like, I don't know if Badiou, it doesn't seem to me, I don't know him, but it doesn't seem to me that he's as accessible. Zalamea, people tell me that he's very accessible, so maybe he would just do it because he's interested in this, So if we are inviting somebody who's not that approachable, not that accessible, maybe we will have to do a lot for that person, and that's not the idea.
So we have two names, Alberto Toscano and Zalamea. You guys know them?
Toscano, I exchanged emails with him, but Zalamea never spoke with him outside of that time in Prague.
But I think that it's easy to discover their contact.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's see who can find there. I mean, Toscano, I have his email. I think we should try Zalamea first, just because he's like presented on this more recently than Toscano did. If Zalamea is not up for it, I can try Toscano later. And then we need to see how we want to do our own presentations. If we want to do them like open, can just set a time and each one presents whatever they want. If we want to kind of single them out around some more specific topic, what would you guys prefer in terms of our own stuff,
I think we should We should present, everybody present, like I agree, coordinated, I agree on certain aspect of the book and then present it. So we coordinate, like for example, give some topics. Whoever wants to, like I want to work on this aspect, for example, then we talk and we explain, and then we go and make the presentation. We can share it or comment on each other's presentation and then present it.
Yeah, I don't have much of a idea of what to present, but I do have a lot of questions about the text now. You know, by the end, it's actually a lot of things are less clear to me about Badiou's system. So I think I would be, if I were to present, I would probably raise a lot of questions.
I think that there is nothing wrong with that.
Can you give me some spoilers on these beautiful questions?
Well, it has everything to do with the extensions we've been trying to make to Badiou's system. So for one, we're trying to consider this addendum or extension, or maybe you could say a stratification of the transcendental. And this capacity to have independent layers of a transcendental, right? Which almost sounds like different worlds, because they're independent. That means it's just as valid to consider them alone as their own world. Like their logic is self-subsistent. So Badiou doesn't talk about like multiple worlds or anything besides the trans world body, right? Like a body that encompasses multiple worlds. And we've discussed this many times that like it doesn't seem quite right to say that layers are worlds.
Yeah, I don't think they are.
Right. Especially if we want to talk about interactions between layers, which, just to use an example between like the capitalist layer and the like the legal or state layer of a world. But yeah, we can also talk about like the thing you sent me the other day, Gabriel, as simple as like two ways to listen to the same beat, right, of a musical piece. The time, two different time signatures for the same work, right? That's almost like two different logics. But is it valid to say that's two worlds and the same musical piece has been indexed in two different worlds? But actually it's the ambiguity between those two independent indexes that is interesting, right? It's not simply that you can hear it in one way and hear it another way, but it's that you can kind of go between the two. There's ambiguity there. So I guess in general, like this interaction between the layers of a transcendental, I think it's my main question.
There's a lot of stuff there I think we could develop.
Yeah.
No, I was just curious as to like if you hit on some other stumbling block, because from time to time these weird questions come up that just make me all confused again. I was hoping you didn't have a new one.
Yeah, it's always, every time you understand one new thing about Badiou, it seems like it opens up 4 other problems, But another question would be like, we talked about time, and we know that for Badiou, time is not really like a first order thing in the world, right? It's like, it doesn't really make sense to talk about before and after in a world necessarily, although there are the four forms of change and so on. So implicitly there's that kind of a temporality there. But yeah, I have some questions about that. Like, when does time show up?
Yeah, I really think it's hard to you know who I think really helps understand Badiou's notion of time? The Lex Luthor of computer design.
Wolfram.
Yeah, because his whole thing with causal graphs now, and this idea that the passage of time is conditioned on the tree of causality, not the inverse, right? Not that things cause each other because they are on time. Time passes because things cause each other, right? And let's say if you have a tree like that, such that one branch has a very redundant kind of sequence, meaning nothing happens in it, whereas another branch has a very kind of highly informative set of changes, there is an interpretation of this in which time passes quicker here than here, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
I think your two questions are the same questions in the end. Like the question on how can there be multiple slicings, not totally independent slicings of, because I think our layering project is not about independent layers, but quasi-independent, right? I mean, they do interact and they do support each other, but they're big branches of this transcendental that totally kind of go on their own, right? I've been trying to think about similes for this, and I think that sensations and perception is a bit like that. Like you get a feel that seeing, hearing, tasting, they are pretty dissimilar, like they're pretty self-contained, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But at some point they need to merge into something, right? And I even think that there is a nice definition. We were talking about this very briefly in one of our meetings that can almost define presence in an embodied human sense in terms of of transcendentals, where the maximal is the sort of enveloping of all perception branches, right? And the minima, it can be called absence. Like when something is absent from all the senses, you can say that you're absent, right? And when something is, let's say, an envelope to all the disjunct senses, so that the envelope is not in any of the senses, then you say that there's a presence, right? Something like that. But I think that the senses do give us a feel for what it means to have partially independent layers. Like, it even convinced me that perhaps it can be treated as branches of, like, it could be our own idea of sub-transcendentals could be seen as just sections of very disjunct branches of a transcendental tree, lattice. Perhaps rather than totally separate lattices that are superimposed onto each other, like that. I think that gives a better feel for it, but it might be formalizable in a more classic sense. I don't know.
Yeah, that leads me to wonder also if maybe Badiou has already anticipated this line of questioning, and actually the atoms already do this for us, because it seems like atoms can be independent, right?
Yeah,
and a single atom can encompass a branch of the transcendental. So, right, although you can localize an atom to further explore that branch, but it's also possible that two atoms have nothing to do with each other. Right?
Yeah,
not compatible. So,
don't you want to say object instead of atom?
No, I think object is this enveloping thing that Gabriel is saying, that object is more like at the level of the unity of perceptions, right? Like unity of apperception, even like the different senses combined together, and that's the object. But the object can be sliced in such a way that you can isolate independent aspects of it that have nothing to do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the object, for example, is the presence, I don't know, your experience of now, that's an object. The experience of being somewhere. But then you could slice that experience into like what you see and what you hear, you know?
Yeah.
And those are independent. Like if I say I heard something, that's a valid statement with its own logic that's independent of what I saw or what else was happening, right? I heard something here.
Yeah.
I was saying object because we already have some hints from Badiou that an object could have its own transcendental. So, I mean, there is no hint in terms of atoms to have their own transcendental.
But I think we should be careful, because having your own logic does not mean having your own transcendental. Like, the logic of our world is so complex, possibly, that you can have regions of isolated logical stability that don't really interact with other parts of the world, but that doesn't mean you're in another world, right? For a logic to be a complete world, you need more than the capacity to operate on it for some amount of stuff and get other stuff that is consistent with it. You need it to be closed so that you never leave it, right? And for example, in the case of perceptions, that's not the case. Like what the listening is actually contained by the presence. The reaches of like the visible seems self-contained. The what can be listened seems self-contained. What you can taste seems self-contained. But the limits of tasting, the limits of seeing, the limits of hearing are actually tied on the envelope of presence and absence. They're not.
I think. Yeah, this is very interesting because it seems to be a model for what we were discussing earlier today, like the relative independence of certain systems, but they have, in a sense, like they can be enveloped, they can have a mutual influence, so people usually run them together, but actually they have each also their criteria, like you know, we are discussing this thing about art and politics and all that. So it seems to be like the system, like the senses could be a model for this in a sense. Because you don't really listen without seeing. Of course, there is a dimension within listening is self-contained. Like in order to do music, you don't need to look, right? You could just listen, for instance. But at the same time, our self-consciousness as, you know, being in a certain space weaves seeing and listening, and even our sense of balance, of our feeling for gravity, for instance. Lots of different things get into it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, they are not the same. It's interesting that they run kind of in parallel, but they add up to something.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually a good definition of moving to our artistic experimentation beyond artistic experience. Because, for example, you're listening to music, that means that the threshold of the logic of listening is given by your presence. If you're away from the music or present to close, all of this, right? But the experimentation with music is when that same logic of listening is now indexed on the object. So it's not your presence or absence that is counting for if something is happening or not. It's the very piece of music itself, right? So, I mean, it's like delegating to the piece of music the synthetic power.
Yeah, it presupposes the synthetic power that was off the subject previously, in a sense.
I would even use this, man, to talk about ambient and structural listening. Perhaps we could reformulate all of it in these terms, like ambient listening. You see my point? Like ambient. Like I'm really trying to develop this kind of in my 2 minutes that I have as a spare time. I mean, we discussed this, but I think it's a very nice idea. Like, so what we just said is, imagine that you have like the tasting sense, the smell, the hearing, the visibility, right? And what we're saying is that with the empty intersection of their disjunction is absence, right? And the maximum envelope of all of this is presence, right? If this is called presence and this is called absence, we call this something like the world of experience, right? But this is not, the limits that you're finding here for the visible, for example, or for the listenable, they are constrained by this maximal and this minimal of experience, right? And you can imagine, for example, that there is some musical object, right? And you can relate to it to some level, in the sense that to relate it to your, for example, let's imagine it's a visible object, right? To relate it to your vision, you need to create a relation here, right? But this constrains what can appear because of the conservative aspect of relation, right? So there is some limit to how this reception can go, since actually the arrow would be perhaps more intuitively the other way, right?
Yeah, this is visible to the,
yeah, in the sense that something in the structure of this object, of what is more visible and less visible and so on, right, can be, this structure should be mappable here.
Yeah.
Right?
I actually think it is the reverse, where, because the transcendental functor goes from the transcendental to the object, and it locates within the object the what it's called, like the projective coherence of the transcendental. So it's like the transcendental exists within the object.
No, I agree with you, but this is the point, that there is actually a transcendental here. We would call it transcendental of the world of the object, and there is a transcendental of the world of experience.
Ah, okay, yeah, I see.
Right, so we're coming up with a relation that maps this world onto this visible spectrum here, right? But you're going to cut off stuff here due to the structure of this, which is what needs to be preserved, because it's necessary that the synthesis of this be my presence. This object can only exist as much as I exist. It cannot exist more than me, right? Something like that. So you could say that this is a way of, let's say, mapping some visible object onto your capacity for discerning visual things. But it's very different from the opposite movement, which is to submit this kind of structure of visibility, right, to the logic of this thing. Even if, let's say, the structure of how this lattice here is organized implies things for its maximal that are incompatible with your own.
But the fact that you could experience the object, doesn't it make the object on the right in the same world, and hence having only one transcendental?
Yeah, I think this is what we normally call, I mean, I'm trying to open the black box of subjective phenomenology, right?
Yeah, this is the point.
Yeah, this would be the world of experience. This would be, for Badiou, there is a world of this object here, where this object exists, that is not reducible to our experience, right? It concerns the object with its own relations of composition.
Because in order to constrain our experience, it has to be independent. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's almost it's almost like we're reproducing the Kantian distinction, but
yeah, with no black box.
With totally, no like unknowable. Yeah, exactly. It's not unknowable.
No unknowable. Like you can formally reconstruct this. So what would be the difference between an objective world and what we call the world of experience, and then becomes what we call the subjective world. Is that the maxima and the minima of this world, right, is connected, can be interpreted in terms of I'm present or I am absent. I mean, an interpretation of this would be to imagine this T0, right? And or T0 here for where some objects are going on. And to imagine that this something is here. If something is here, we can say that this maxima exists. If it's outside, right? It's not. For the world of the experience of this thing, right? And then you can create two relations rather than one. You can talk about the relation where some part of the transcendental here, which covers the values of some object. So let's say some region here, whatever, some region here concerns a given object, and we imagine it to be mapped onto our visual field. This means that if this is happening, then this visual map, the visual version of the object, nothing in the object can have the maximal value because the maximal value is my presence, right? This is the classic phenomenological trope that I'm confirmed by the thing that I'm seeing, right? When I see something, I'm also seeing that I'm seeing, right? This would be implied by the fact that something that had an enveloping value here, or that was connected with some maxima here, it's distinct now, disconnected and connected to my maxima as my presence. So I'm in the presence of this. This is the arrow of that accounts for this. But you can also have the inverse arrow, where this capacity for vision is actually put in the service of something here, where now my maxima of being present is actually put into question, because there will be things that will have a maximal value that are different from what had a maximal value in my world of experience, right? And this is actually nice because it gives an account of why there is a distinction between two forms of absence. The absence of experience, from presence to absence, and the absence that is like this, which goes from being present to being
something that don't register. Something that doesn't register.
You're not relevant, right? Your presence is not relevant. It's not a matter if you are or not present, right? For example,
this is really nice.
Right. I mean, just imagine that to make it simpler, that we have something like this. In the world of experience, maxima being my presence and minimum being my absence, I have some limited capacity for computation, like what I can compute, right? Or what I can name, or something like this. So I can only compute in terms of finite. It's like something like this. I can compute one, that I can compute two, and if I can compute one thing, I can compute two, and so on. But in the transcendental of number theory, right? There are you can actually know the infinite. You're not constrained by finite operations, right? So, for example, there is an axiom that envelops an infinite series of numbers. If I try to bring this to my experience, I conclude, like the intuitionists, that this axiom makes no sense. I cut the axiom out because the maximal is my presence and I cannot count, right? But if I submit to mathematical thinking, I'm actually cutting down my own limits and assuming the inner limits of the logic of numbers, where I can add an infinite axiom and it works. So this does the synthesis in the second case, and this does the synthesis in the first case.
This is a great example because it's exactly what we've been understanding as the difference between this and this, right?
Yes.
right? What is guaranteeing the universal exposition of the world in the case of our experience is different from what guarantees universal exposition in the case of the mathematical thinking, which has a much wider type of maps, right?
Yeah.
Different types of
In
relations.
both cases, we are talking about different worlds. So the left circle and right circle are different worlds. They are not part of the same world.
Yeah, because the world of mathematics exists regardless of if I'm doing mathematics.
Right. So
but there is something we could call experiencing a mathematical proof, or experiencing Cantor's proof of the equivalent cardinalities of infinity, right?
Yeah.
And that
But
experiencing, how do we give a name? How do we account for a theory of experience and not a theory of thinking, right? So which is something he didn't develop.
Actually, let's bring back like this to the discussion that we have today. In one of the lectures that Badiou had, he said that being an event is about the universality of truth within a world or within a situation. Like how truth is a generic or i.e. universal within a particular situation. And then he said in logics of words, then I had a problem with being an event, and that was how truths are universal inter-situations or inter-worlds, not intra-worlds, but inter-worlds. So a truth within one world is also universal within another world. So I addressed that question in logics of words. I did not see how he addressed that in logics of words.
But I think didn't he say logics of words was about the singularity of truth?
Yes, I remember this. The universality, singularity, and then
the absolute.
The absolute, yes. Yes.
Yeah, but do you remember this from his lecture in New Jersey? Do you guys remember what I'm trying to quote from Badiou?
Yeah, I remember that the quote was, being an event concerns proving that universality is possible
within a situation, and then truth in one world may become or is universal across multiple worlds.
Yeah, but that's already accounted for in I don't
not
think
in
that,
being an event.
I don't think that his claim that the main objective in logics of worlds was to account for the transworldliness, even though it is accounted for, I think. But I think that he claimed that the main thing was the singularity of truths. How can they appear in a singular way, right?
Mm-hmm. He says this in the book itself, but I'm trying to, and the reason that I brought this, regardless of whether he said that or not, in logics of words, there is no operation that is interworldly. Is that correct?
Kind of, because there is one operation that goes between transcendentals, which is the point operation, the point function. It goes from T
and the body, right?
Yeah, and the body.
Yeah, but those are not transcendentals of worlds. You're still talking about the same world, even in terms of body.
I find that ambiguous, because it seems that it is a relationship between a world and a Boolean and a classical world.
Yeah, I think that, but the thing is that I think what clarifies a bit what you guys are saying is the following, that the structure, in my understanding, is the following. The greater logic describes one transcendental and the relation between the transcendental and the multiple A, the world, the actual multiple, right? Then with because he already does this, he begins with the transcendental, which is book 2. He goes into atoms that connect with the multiple, right? On book 3. And then he talks about how this thing here constrains objects in a world, book 4. Then he uses the interplay between logic and ontology to talk about the inexistent, which is actually also in book 4, right? So there is actually something here. And then he uses a connection to ontology to talk about the site. Site is defined on the multiple A, not on the transcendental, right?
Yeah.
And then this is where it's from a retroaction on ontology that the body and the point are defined, right? So it's there is a function. The reason why the Boolean condition is added to the idea that, okay, this is mapped onto something else that is T like this, and this is Boolean. It's not because he decided from his head. It's because you're not doing a move from one transcendental to another, one world to another. You're thinking transcendentally the move from the transcendental to the multiple, which is classical because it is a multiplicity. So that constraint actually comes from the fact that the book does something like this, right? So
yeah,
if it's not concerned,
so you have transcendental, then you go to atom, right?
Yeah,
and then you go to the Boolean. Yeah.
Yeah, from atom to multiple, from multiple as a site defined on atoms and minimal existences to points and so on. But one thing that I agree is that if you look at the theory of points, it doesn't speak about, the theory of points is distinct from the theory of bodies, meaning you can talk about non-eventual points. Nothing prevents you from defining, and we're doing this in our
question. Like in the theory of points, I presented it much connected with the subjectivation process, but the chapter itself, the bit about Brasilia, has nothing to do with the subjectivation process in a sense. He just puts over like a classifier on the world. Like there's a classifier that means, is this, I don't know, like communist or right wing? Like you can, and then you get different points. Like you can classify the whole city and the whole areas of the city that are, they are built according to the communist, hypotheses of.
But now that you mentioned Brasilia, take this as an example. Okay, this is a transcendental of the experience of walking, and this is the transcendental of Brasilia. And his whole point is that, imagine this is the map of Brazil, and this is an actual experience people have. I had this experience. Like, if you're a person standing in Brasilia and you look at the streets from the standpoint of your eyes, it seems confusing. But if you look at Brasilia from the standpoint of the top, you know where you are. It's not a city meant to be seen from your standpoint. So if you walk around thinking that your presence or absence, right, your proximity or distance, it's what defines. It's a good synthetic point of view to understand the city. You don't really get a good mapping. The good map of Brasilia actually comes from realizing that the maximal is actually the bird's eye view. It's meant to be seen as a bird or as some structure like this, right? And then you localize yourself not as a maximal in the city. This is the beautiful thing.
It's a strength actually about Brasilia. People who don't like Brasilia, they complain exactly about this. Like, it's not for me. I'm walking there. I don't understand what's going on. Is everything so weird?
But you see how genius that is. Like, it's an architectural plan that forces you to take an existential position on your experience that is not maximal in order to navigate the city. Like, you don't see it, You don't manage to walk around and learn about the city if you try to see it yourself. But if you take your view as a partial view of the bird's eye view, you understand, okay, this street will cross with that one because actually this is shaped like something that I cannot see, like those classic drawings for aliens, you know, or for gods.
But the thing that is interesting about the theory of points in the chapter of the theory of points about Brazil is that this is kind of obscure to me. Like the Boolean transcendental there has to do with the function assignated to each part of the city. So you like cover the city with this function, and then you get the positives and the negatives, something like this. It's like, almost like I have a criteria that makes things a yes or no. Like I have a very rich transcendental, a very rich experience of something, then I have a criteria that I will use to turn everything into either a yes or a no.
Yeah, but
this looks like it's a subjective decision, and then you have also the Sartre, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce Sartre in English, Sartre, the Sartre example, that has something to do with this as well. That is an ethical predicament of sorts or something like this. So I think it's a bit confusing to understand the theory of points as necessarily being the retroaction on the multiple, because I don't know, being a positive or negative value concerning the communist desideratum that was at place in the construction of Brasilia is not really an affair, a question of ontology, right?
I don't think that, but I disagree. I don't think that, I think his whole point is to turn ethics into another case of localization and navigation, rather than to turn navigation into a problem of ethics. And I think that this, here in What It Is to Live, you have a very nice moment where he says something that really fits to what I'm trying to say. He says, the unfolding of consequences linked to the event of trace proceeds through the treatment of points. Not continuously, but in sequence, point by point. And then he says, this is the crucial part. Every present has a kind of fiber, right? The points of the world in which the infinite appears before the two of choice are like the fibers of the present. Its intimate constitution in its worldly becoming. So look, it's not that every point is a fiber. The point of a world in which the infinite appear between the two are the fibers. There are points which this is not the case. So for example, you can be in Brasilia and you can struggle to understand what is the correct perspective to see the fiber of the city, right? So for example, I'm staying in Brasilia, like this is just very basic, some drawing like this, right? Some basic street here, some other big street here, and I'm here. And there are these weird blocks here, and I can't really locate myself, right? To cut the city in terms of what is far from me, what is near, what is I don't know, near the lake, and what is far from the lake, that's not necessarily the best way to cut it. If you cut it according to its very being, because it's grounded on the multiple itself, like realizing that it is a bird, it's not realizing that it's metaphorically a bird. It has the actual fucking shape, and taking the point of view from which this appears helps you to slice it in a way that has this fiber, right? So there is a connection between choosing the right point of view, right, and making the fibrous structure appear. I don't think it has anything to do with, let's say, the communist desideratum. Like it's communist because your experience is not the center of it. Like structurally, if you take yourself as a center, you don't manage to navigate. It's not communist because you should like it because Soviets paid for it. You should like it. I mean,
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that he's comparing, for instance, paths taken by the architects. You're right about that. But at the same time, he's comparing to the villas in the lake. So the private life of luxury that is there. And he's comparing, like he makes a comparison between not south and north, but east and west, right? East and west, like the lakes, and then the military industrial complex within the city. And then he proposes that you cover it with a Boolean transcendental that gets positive and negative values concerning this idea of, I don't know, I'm kind of simplifying here, talking about the communist desiderata, but it is something that has to do with that. Like there is, luxury and private life and villas and the houses of the politicians and all that. He's criticizing this aspect of the thing, and the way the city was built in order to be like a communist form, in a sense, and to satisfy a kind of communist form of life or something like this. And so you cover it with the Boolean transcendental, and then you get the negative and positive values concerning this idea, right?
Yeah, but the point is this. The point, my opinion, is that if you are a person and you're standing on a street in Brasilia and you see things, synthesize them from your standpoint. For example, the best place, the best standpoint will be the luxury house, simply because if you are in that house, it's very good. Whereas
like the lake is little houses. The lake, in a sense, we're talking like everybody knew Brasilia, but yeah, the lake is like an American suburb in a sense. Like the lake is an American suburb. It's shaped like an American suburb.
Yes.
Like
I'm trying to make a point that I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think my point doesn't really require people to know the city. My point is simply that the very same principle that requires you to take a different standpoint to look at the city, which will be a trace, right? It synthesizes the city as a body where it's not your body. Your body is not the measure. It's the city's body that is the measure, right? The very thing that does this, and we know that this is maximal, right? Is the thing that will reorganize what is valuable and what is not valuable in the city in a new way. For example, the rich area or the rich people, they're very highly valued from this very standpoint that you are where you are highly valued.
Yeah, this is what I mean. Like
right? Whereas
you're walking among houses, like normal houses at the scale of the subject. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and the point is that from the standpoint of the trace of the city as this other way of looking at it, the areas of higher equality in the city, they are the ones that are more, let's say, resonant with the trace, right? Yeah. So the global structure of the city, the fact that there is a main avenue with all the important buildings available and transparent to everyone, the fact that it's like a cross pointing somewhere, and these things, they have higher value than this. So you synthesize the whole space in a new way from this perspective, and things that would be highly valued become less valued and vice versa. But this is totally structural. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
I can only imagine what this guy.
But it's not that clear in the text. I mean, you are presenting it way better than the text. It's not that clear.
Yeah, you guys know that I'm the Miller of the Badiou thing. Like,
this is my main critique of the book. I have I had many issues with the book, and the group helped me a lot, because I usually think the version we can come up with is better than what is written. I think the book is very rushed, and he presupposes a lot, and he says stuff like, this is all objective, and okay, I'm convinced, and I'm going along with it. So I miss a lot of mediations in the book. He's not very mediated for me.
No, I totally agree.
He's just claiming things and go on. You have to take me how you say that you have to take my word for it, go on, and you see in the formal chapter and all that. But a lot gets left behind, you know, by this procedure. But I'm still not convinced about this and about that. So this is my main critique of the book. I think that the machinery is fantastic, the system is fantastic, everything is incredible. But as a book, I think it's very rushed. It's not very.
I agree.
It's not
I know.
very,
I totally agree. I totally agree.
To the reader. Yeah.
I think the first the chapters on greater logic is great. But
that's why it's called greater logic. Great logic.
But I think the other 3 chapters, I think the chapter on change is very rushed. I think the chapter on point is very profound, and he should have spent a lot more time on it to discuss what he really means by theory of points. But I think the chapter on body was about the right size.
But look at this, for example. Just look at this. This is the amount of statements for the chapter on object, okay? It starts on statement 28, goes all the way to statement 38b, 39. The chapter on relation already has only from 40 to 43. The chapter on change has 44 to 49, so 5 statements. These are all the statements of the theory of points.
Yeah.
3 statements.
Yeah, whereas I think, I mean, the way that you guys talk about theory of points is a lot more sophisticated than my understanding. My understanding was very simple, that he introduces the theory of points as functions between two spaces, two sets. One set is the actual transcendental of the world, and the other set is just the set of the 0 and 1.
You're right.
And I think the important part of the chapter is that all the points in a world forms a topological space, which satisfies 4 axioms.
Yeah, no, I see that this is the core, of course, of theory of points. I understand that. But I was confused by certain examples, and the examples are usually the weakest part of the book, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Many times they introduce more confusion than, you know, enlighten us.
Especially, many times. I mean, he uses examples, and he uses examples that are very obscure and not clear, like fragments of some literature or some libretto of an opera that I haven't even heard the opera, let alone knowing the libretto, and make it as an example. And he doesn't even explain the whole story, the whole libretto. He references 2 characters in the middle of the story and says, oh, remember that character told this character that I am going to the shore in order to meet the soldiers. That is an example of a point. What? I mean, what are you talking about?
Yeah. This is what I mean. Like, it's presupposing a lot. I don't. Yeah, the examples are problematic for me, I think.
Yeah.
And this one of Brazil, I mean, of course, Gabriel gave a brilliant version of it now, but it is not really what is written, right? I was like, what? Okay, this is interesting, yes, but it doesn't seem to be the retraction on the multiple. It seems like you are bringing some other thing over and evaluating one transcendental with another, you know. It seemed to me like that in the Brazil example. But of course, I agree with you, Reza, that the core thing is the topological space, the 4 conditions, of course, yes. But the example made me confused about it, you know, in the chapter.
Yeah, if I wanted now to go back and read the book one more time, I actually start with the introduction and jump into the formal directly.
Yeah.
Well, not in the transcendental section, probably transcendental and object section. These two sections, I'm not too fond of the example for the relation chapter either, but the transcendental and object section, probably with exception to those two, I will read the introduction and jump into the formal and bypass the whole example. After I read formal, yes, probably I go back and read the example just to make sure that I've read the book, but it's just, the examples don't help at all.
Yeah, but I have my impression is that, especially rereading today What is to Live and this conclusion, I do think it's a rushed book. My impression is that it's a book of somebody who, I really feel like that example I suggested of that Bergman movie. I really suggest everyone see it, The Magician. I think I told you guys about it, right? It's a movie about a guy who does real magic, right? But he hides it behind some spectacle to make it more magical. I do think that the intervention of this book is a bit like that. It's a bit rushed. It's a bit desperate, to perhaps a bit insecure that he will be left out of the contemporary debate. So he quotes students. He quotes Meyasu.
Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing because he quotes Meyasu in the conclusion to say one paragraph later he doesn't agree with. He says, for example, he says on when he mentioned
the talented, among them the talented and forgotten, Meyasu.
Yeah, Meyasu is developing a theory of the not yet of the vine. That's on point 8. And then on point 11 he says, but I need neither God nor the divine. Like, he's trying to charm people, I think. It's a bit desperate. Like, I think he has a bad take on how to seduce the reader. He thinks giving like more obvious examples will make the book more accessible, but then if you engage with the book seriously, the examples contradict the serious concept part. And he quotes the students, but on stuff that he's like 10 times better than the students. So it's like condescending in a way. He's not really engaging. Like, Meyasu is not adding anything here. Like,
yeah, but I don't think he's being condescending toward Meyasu. I think he thinks the world of Meyasu, really. I really do think he
no,
does.
Okay, but again, why did he, like, he mentions the guy in the conclusion to say that he's doing great work. I just don't need it. Like, it's true.
Yeah, he disagrees with him, but yeah, I think he really loves Meyasu.
I think so too.
Yeah,
but I have the impression that he was quite taken by the way he opened up something in the Anglophone world, because his disciples were well known. People who studied him a bit and who studied him in the previous phase, like Luca Fraser and everyone, was now focusing on other stuff, but clearly authorized by his approach. But he wasn't being taken forward, you know. And I think that he tried to catch up in a way and be relevant.
But do you think? I think there's a problem with that narrative, because the book came out in 2006. When do you think this started to happen? Because, you know, if you mean like the speculative realist business, the conference was held in 2007, so it was after the publication in French, the French publication.
Yeah, but Meyasu was his student, and he was starting to become famous. Tucento and Luca Fraser.
But the book was already published, right? I mean,
After Finitude was published, and it was becoming a big success.
After Finitude was published in 2006 in French, nobody gave a shit, like, because it is in French, you know, this will be the destiny of my own book. But in 2007, it became a hit because Ray Brassier translated it. So, but by then, I mean, Logics of Worlds, the French version was already published. I'm not sure if this is.
Yeah, I think.
How was the reception in French?
There was only 2 conferences organized around Logics of Worlds in France. There are 2 interesting books. There are some interesting threads, but I think the book is very, very demanding. Like, I think that being an event, though it has a lot of hidden gems and a lot of stuff that wasn't commented on, people got the gist of it, and enter into this discussion, and he actually spent 10 years promoting it with other smaller books and things like this. He didn't do the same.
I think being an event is much more straightforward. Like this is the structure of the book itself. I mean, it's a much easier book to get into, and
it's a lot more coherent.
The hard stuff comes afterwards. So, you know,
yeah.
I think
it's really weird. It's really, really, really weird. Like the form and the structure and this zigzag between, you know, almost popular philosophical literature and then this fucking dense formal stuff coming in, and I was, come on, you were talking about, you know, little plants on a house. And
I mean, this. I mean, I can, as a student of Badiou, I can live with that. I can live with the interruptions. Like I read Being an Event. I think Being an Event is a much more coherent book, both in terms of message and structure. Being Logics of Words from the get-go is not an independent book. You need, if you don't know, if you haven't read, or haven't read something of Badiou, or haven't read Being an Event, you will be absolutely lost, in my view, in Logics of Words. Logics of Words is not a standalone book. You need to know something of Badiou's system, preferably Being an Event, in order to follow it. So this is already one flaw, which may not be a flaw because it's volume 2 of Being an Event. But the other flaw that I think it has is that the book is not coherent. The Greater Logic is very coherent. I like it. It's much more coherent, even probably more coherent than Being an Event. It's like at the level of Critique of Pure Reason coherent. It's very coherent. I like that those two books, Transcendental and Object, they are very, very coherent. But the rest are not as coherent. And number 3, I think it finishes abruptly. Like the question of what is it to live as the conclusion of the book, I don't think is a conclusion of this book. It's a good conclusion. It's a good chapter, but I don't think it's a chapter to conclude this book.
Yeah. And I think that another question, or another way of phrasing that question that would be good, perhaps more revealing, is what did Badiou think this book was if this is the conclusion? You know, like what did he think he was doing, and what was he focused on if this was the conclusion? And I do think that, I mean, it's interesting that, for example, the theory of the idea has no concrete role to play anywhere in the book, right? But in the conclusion is the main idea. The main statement of the conclusion is to live, and to live for an idea is the same thing. And if you read the second manifesto for philosophy, the whole manifesto is about the idea, from beginning to end. And I think that his concern is very different from ours. I have the impression that, I mean, especially from the way that he frames things in the second manifesto, I feel like it's a more, and it concerns also us because we live in a different world. We live in a post-2008 world, post-economic crisis, nobody's asking if politics exists. Like, that's not an issue. But Logics of Words is a book that is still living like at the outer edge of a very weird decade of no big unrest, or
Reagan and Clinton era.
Yeah, it's the end of this Bush kind of
early
Obama reformist, right? I think it's for him mostly an intervention on the side of, you guys are just surviving. Like, there is something more. And I don't think he wants to, there is even perhaps a bit of an old guy, young people kind of problem of trying to say cool stuff to the young people. You know, this is when he adopted the idea of, you know, my role as a philosopher is to corrupt the youth. This is actually a very valuable position and it's needed. This idea of something can still happen, right? I feel like that's very much the affect connect. He said that he was very melancholic when he wrote Being an Event, but it was, let's say, very courageous sort of coming to terms with a political sequence, right? The last thing he writes before he writes Being an Event is like not even a written thing. It's a presentation for the French academia saying, you guys don't know shit about politics, what real politics is like. There's no such thing as the political. A lot of stuff just happened and you guys just looked at it happening. You didn't do anything. And then Being an Event is like a very serious proposal that what happened did happen, right? These things do happen. I think that the period when he writes Logics of Worlds is more of a period of like stasis, you know? And I have the impression that he's much more concerned with that sort of issue, right? Which would lead him to conclude the book with What is to Live. I think that if he were to give it a conclusion from our standpoint of like a lot of heterogeneous stuff going on, nobody's like the idea of atonic worlds with no points. Like I'm sure he wouldn't spend one page on this today. Like it's a nice idea, but I mean, it's not the most relevant moment. Nobody is gonna read the current world and say there are no points, right? I think he would have refocused the book. So I have the impression that the conclusion also gives us a light onto what the hell he thought, like how the reception would come and what was the main message, right? That, look guys, you can actually use the material, like the materiality of stuff around you can serve as the basis for doing something else, right? You don't need to wait for a transcendent being to do anything, right? The less
actually the problem is now more the face-off between those three subjective forms, especially occultism and formalism, or the faithful subject. That's as opposed to atonic and tonic worlds. That's not the face-off anymore. The face-off is that you have, granted that you have a trace of an event, it's felt everywhere. Granted that there is a body, the question is that, are you in the mortification of the body or in a strengthening of the body?
And I think that's why we feel like there's something missing at the end as well, because a lot of what he thinks is like amazing that it is possible. But guys, this is possible.
I see your point, but my criticism, it's not criticism, but it's not disappointing. I think it's the way that it's a little bit different than what you're saying at the same time. It is more towards like the formal machinery. Like when I say that this chapter is missing a chapter on truth, I'm not saying because of the difference between the dominance of neoliberal world yet in 2006 and the decay of neoliberal world in our time. I'm not talking about that. I'm more talking about a philosophical project in terms of the coherence of the work itself. The last chapter is what is to live. It was very unexpected for me, and I think it's very wishy-washy. It's like one of his little books that he writes. He doesn't have any wishy-washy stuff in Being an Event. He doesn't have a lot of flamboyant statements and those kind of things that he does in small pamphlets. This How to Live is like that, but that's not my problem with this. So this, I agree with you that probably it is inspired by the fact that he's still trying to sell to the reader that this dominance of neoliberal world is not the death of events. So I agree with that assessment. But my criticism, if it is a criticism, is that he should have had a chapter more on wrapping up the entire machinery. And that chapter is missing. That chapter is something similar to the discussion of generic, but in the more in the language of the new machinery.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if I could have it my way, I think the book would have to be 1,000 pages. Like, I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff I wish it was in the book. It's a pity that, I mean, we did plan to do something in the last couple of meetings that we didn't end up doing because we took 2 meetings to present the Marx interlude. But Dennis and I were talking a lot about the connections between the whole forcing approach in being an event and what goes on at the end of this book. And it's actually incredibly coherent. The forcing, the body and the points, and the ultra filters in the third book. Like they're many times they're discussed together in the literature, even like contemporary literature on the topic.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Like, I think, yeah, he doesn't make it as coherent, or as like, he doesn't hold our hand through it as much as the first half of the book. But I think also, he mentions this at What is to Live. He says that democratic materialism can be defined by taking thought to be the algebra of appearance. You know that statement?
Yeah.
So I think one of the reasons we think that the first part of the book is more coherent is actually because it is so familiar to us. It is the logic of slicing things up. Like, that's capitalism. Like, capitalism is the
master slicer.
The master of slicing, of predication. And so it's very like natural to describe it in this way. But the logic of points and this topological thing, I think it's unnatural in some way to us. So I think part of the coherence is actually on our side, because we're not as familiar with this. Like, what kind of space is this comprised of points? When we say it's comprised of points, which are decisions, it's not the space of like a country or something like that. Or, I mean, we can apply it to things like national borders or a city and so on. But this idea of space, I think, is much more profound. But yeah, I agree. He doesn't like explore it that much. The closest he gets with it, he has an example by Galois on group theory, but it's kind of hard to, fit it exactly. It seems kind of removed from.
I partially think I think he chose the Galois example for the same reason he chose the Valéry example of the poem, because the very term body is immanently presented in the example. Like, Galois actually names what he's doing, theory of the cough, theory of the body.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Right, and in Valéry's poem, Valéry names the moment where something emerges and changes the relation between the sky and consciousness, or the sea and consciousness, in terms of the appearance of a body. Like, I think I agree, it's too seductive. It's perhaps not the best way to do it. And I do wish, I mean, the questions Dennis asked and other questions, I think that the book gives you this feeling that there are so many threads that are available to push or to pull, but you feel like it's way too many, right? It's just a lot of interesting stuff you could continue to develop. And it's weird that it's not a bit more developed in the book, I think. And I do agree that it's such an easy dunk to simply have a part in the formal chapter on bodies to say, by the way, guys, do you know the thing I did in Being an Event? Voila, it fits perfectly. How about that? Like, why not show up at that point and do all this other stupid stuff? Like, why not go the extra 3 pages to claim explicitly that the theory of the appearance of truth is perfectly compatible with the theory of a generic supplement to a model, right?
Yeah.
So
he doesn't make that explicit link, but yeah, he leaves the thread open, I guess, for the reader to do that work. But
I would love to listen to what you guys have to say about that. I mean, not that I doubt but you, not that I need convincing. It's just I like to see the connection, because maybe that answers my question, because the way that, or at least the way that I think about this is, I mean, he builds the machinery from the bottom to show how trace basically creates or synthesizes a body. How a trace, which is the trace of, which is something that caused by event that did not exist to come to exist, which synthesizes a body that is affected by the event. But that's where the body ends, right? Whereas if you look at this in being an event, you're talking about meditation 22 until meditation 40, that he builds towards truth. And none of this is discussed in Logics of Words. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but look, I think that once, like Caron asked the thing about the Boolean transcendental of points. I think that if you just take that Boolean aspect of it, the yes or no of it, to mean you're putting on glasses that are looking at things ontologically, or looking at, let's say, in that interplay of atomic logic between the logical consistency and the ontological support, you're given the chance by a site to look at the ontological support as the bearer of some logical novelty, right? I'm going to look into the support. I don't know what, I mean, it doesn't have anything that logically is discernible in it. But since the site has brought the multiple into play, I can say, okay, there's some stuff here that has no logical, makes no difference. What can I do with it? Does something connect to this? At that point, you are exactly at the beginning of meditation 31 in being an event. You're faced with a multiple. It's classically described. And the issue is, can you connect stuff in ways that don't fall under the encyclopedia of a situation? But now, what's in bracket is our encyclopedia is actually larger than a dictionary of well-formed classical formulas. It's actually a huge dictionary of views of formulas, of fuzzy formulas. And what we're finding in the multiple is not contained in that broader spectrum of difference, larger than even knowledge, right? Its appearance. So with that in-between proviso there, the situation at the end of the theory of sight and the beginning of points, which is stop looking from the standpoint of your experience. And for example, the very site of Brasilia has something to teach you about its structure, right? The site is not some imaginary thing, it's the actual multiple support, right? Which is more accessible from a different standpoint than from your own. The moment that this is brought into play, the inner machinery of what it means to connect things in a new way such that it doesn't fall into a predicate is pretty much being an event. The question that he's also adding is, people say, fine, I just read Meditation 31 to 40 about inquiries, ranks, conditions, the subject language and all of that. But all of that is like classical stuff, ontological stuff, that might not appear. And he says, no, look here. I can actually show that the connection between decisions you make appears. That's the addition he's making. It will appear singularly. It will not be some mystical, I'm out of the world into being itself experience, because there is actually a correlate at the objective level.
While you're talking, I can make these connections in my mind between the two. What I'm in particularly interested is the last section, which is the theory of generic. I don't see theory of generic in here, in logics of words.
But what should you be seeing here if the generic is not a transformation directly on appearance, a transformation in being?
What do you mean?
Well, the generic is actually a question of sets and subsets. It's not.
Well, generic is, first of all, generic is an orientation, right? I mean, he explains different ontological orientation in order to think about situation in being an event. And in the entire being an event, he, in disguise, he is just juxtapose these orientations with, I think, a bigger project that he has, which is the maximality of thinking. So he's saying these orientations are all valid. Like you can have a constructivist orientation, you can have a transcendental orientation, or you can have a generic orientation. But he thinks in order to answer ontological questions about truth, the right orientation is the generic orientation. And in disguise, the approach behind the scene is, well, how can we think maximally about being? And this maximal way of thinking about being is to think in the register of generic, in the generic register. So he basically has the whole spiel that leads into this. And then from there, he basically has his, the chapter on the theory of forcing. I don't know, like 3 or 4 chapters on theory of forcing and how forcing works. He reconstructs the entire Cohen's proof on generic in the last section. Now, the relationship of truth to the machinery that he develops, the generic, and also the whole business of orientation of thought, to me, as you are well aware, and we discussed this in detail like 2 years ago, is not so much related with his earlier discussion with events, right? Mm-hmm. Because that machinery, whether or not generic is as an orientation, is taken up by, in order for us to answer ontological question or not, is not something that is affected by event. It's just a register of thinking, right? The way that he explains this in Being an Event is in this way, so that the relation of events and relation of the destiny of thought to think ontologically about truth, this link is not a link that he makes very, very explicitly or necessitates that this link has to exist. In logics of word, there is no discussion of this. In logics of word, you're talking about appearing and transcendental, about objective phenomenology. The objective phenomenology allows you to have things like an event in conditions where an object, a multiple that is the ground for appearing, temporarily disrupts the transcendental, of the world, and it basically makes its element to appear according to a different version of a transcendental, which is its own transcendental. And because of that, things appear that are not supposed to appear, or appear in a way that they are not supposed to appear. And there are various different conditions that if they appear, but the appearance is reconcilable, can adjust the transcendental of the world, so on and so forth. So we have like a spectrum of different modifications till we have events, which is something appears that cannot, is prohibited to appear, or was not supposed to appear, which is the minimal that now all of a sudden becomes maximal. And it has greatest amount of consequence, right? So up to this point, you have to theory of events, right? From here, we move on to discussion of points, logic of points, and we move on to discussion of bodies, which add additional machinery around how the trace of events can gather a body and have this body efficacious, be effective. All this discussion, which I agree has to do with intervention, maybe inquiry, and those chapters on those axiom of choice, those chapters that you named after event, they are all fine. You can make the connection, but it never makes that conceptual jump from these chapters to orientations in ontology and the generic as the orientation of thought, and how would this the entire thing, the maximality of thinking in that concept in being an event can be transposed in the new machinery of logics of words. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he doesn't spell it out. He doesn't spell it out, I agree, but it is there. I know it's there. I mean, from everything we've been reading about points and the relation to filters and this the actual proof of forcing, I feel like he's like drawing a big boundary around this thing, around this proof, but he doesn't actually give you the proof itself. It is there though, I think.
Like I said, I love to hear what you guys have. I mean, you have dotted it seems that my questions you have already thought through, and you're convinced that it is there. I love to listen to what you guys have discovered.
But the thing is, I think that there are two questions in what you're saying, and you mentioned this before many times, that it seems to me that you're somehow convinced that the machinery of logics of worlds should affect some big change in the fundamental building blocks of his ideas, and it should lead to a reconsideration of some basic stuff, right? For example,
not quite. I'm not saying this.
Yeah, but for example, something that you did say, I remember, was that, well, if category theory can think and do more than classic set theory, why not do it? Why not go there? Right?
Say it again, you got disrupted.
No, for example, I remember you saying at some point, you said, whoa, so I can see that category theory is actually broader than set theory. It can do more stuff. So by the idea of a maximality of thinking, why not explore these things? Why isn't Badiou admitting that this is broader and that things should be recasted in terms of logics of worlds? So why doesn't logics of worlds redo the stuff from being an event in its own terms? Mm-hmm. And I think that there are two questions there. There are separate questions, which is, what does it mean for a guy like Badiou to choose such a potent formal tool like category theory and then to restrict it? Isn't this against what he said he would do in being an event when he chose mathematics and chose some battles and said, well, the generic orientation proves more things, it's more interesting because of that? So shouldn't he do the same with category theory, and this wouldn't require him to do some reevaluation? I think that's one question, which I think concerns that idea of maximality of thinking and what it means.
Yeah, that's a valid question. I might have asked that, but that's not a question in my mind anymore.
Yeah, because for me that's a separate question from the fact that I find it actually I'm perplexed on the opposite side. Like if you do this, man, like I'm just opening being an event here. Okay, check out this page. The general idea is to consider that a truth groups together all the terms of the situation which are positively connected to the event. Why are we taking a look at the set of positive connections? And then he goes into the idea of indifferent markers and positive markers. The whole theory here of inquiries is exactly like the theory of points. It's totally absolutely connected. I mean, this page could actually be in Logics of Worlds.
I agree. I have no question about that. I agree with this page. What I'm talking about is not this. What I'm talking about is in being an event, there are two moments. One is the moment that you move towards the truth from behind, from below, which is all this. And the other moment is the moment that you think about whether or not there is a way for me to think more about the truth ontologically. That moment, which is generic, belongs to that moment, not this moment.
No, this is exactly. I mean, I'm just concerned because all of this fits. Like all of this is connected. I mean, what you call the generic as an orientation. I don't know if it is such a potent thing that it should require. I mean, the guy actually gave you, let's say, the question you could ask here is, I mean, he says that the question he wants to answer in this point is, where is it? He says, so our problem here is, on what condition can one be sure that the set of terms of the situation which are positively connected to the event is in no manner already classified within the encyclopedia of the situation? On what conditions? Well, the conditions of a generic supplement. Right? That's what the next couple of meditations need to show, right? And the second question, which Logics of Worlds answer, is on what conditions can we be sure that this set of positively connected terms appears? Is there a set of operators compatible with the logic of appearance that guarantee us that if such a set of terms of situation which are
positively... That's exactly what I mean.
But that's the whole end of the book.
No, what I'm saying is that condition is not coming from the event. That condition is not coming from the theory of event. That comes from somewhere else. That is outside. That's coming outside of this machinery. You're adding that condition.
Wait, what condition are we adding?
Yeah, I'm understanding.
The condition of generic. The condition of generic is not because you have an event.
No, but neither in Logics of Worlds is the theory of the body and the theory of points an effect of there having been an event.
That is true.
So I don't understand what.
So this is our current discussion is not what I was saying earlier, but this is a good discussion. Let's have it. So look at the next sentence. We cannot directly formulate this potential condition via an examination of the infinite set of these terms, because this set is always to come. And moreover, we cannot add this condition because we can truly examine what the inquiry point by point or element or an element gives positive and negative values. You have to be sure that there is something that can underlie that this inquiry gives us a set, that this set is not named by the encyclopedia of the model. That condition is the condition that comes from a different place, which is the orientation of thought.
So let me see if I understand. On your position is that the only reason why people do new things is because they have a generic orientation of thinking philosophically.
The reason that people do think because they are committed to the maximality of thought, yes.
Philosophically.
Philosophically.
Yeah, I disagree with that completely. I mean, one thing is for him to say, look, you can use set theory to formalize, you know, a more conservative or not view on the continuum hypotheses, but nothing prevents you from taking this supplementation here, which exists in mathematics, as your orientation. It's sort of a philosophical orientation, but we're going to make it.
But look, how else? I mean, so let's talk about this some more. How else do you think that that a supplementation point by point will guarantee that you come to a new thing?
Nothing guarantees. Nothing. You do it and you try it out.
But here he's saying, on what condition can one be sure that the set of terms of the situation which are positively connected? I mean, philosophically sure, not in experimentation.
Yeah, okay, that's a different question. Yes,
right?
we know it's thinkable.
You ask whether it is philosophically or not. I'm saying, how else philosophically you can say that this experimentation results on a new thing?
I have an idea here. I think a nice intuitive way to think of this is that the encyclopedia actually has a concrete existence in the world, right? It is the set of predicates of the world. Yeah. That's the encyclopedia. So a nice way to think, am I doing something new right now or not, is if, can what I'm doing be classified by the predicates of the world as it is? If it can't, then you have your answer, right? Then you're doing something new.
You have infinite predicates. How would you know? I mean, you cannot examine every single predicate.
No, but
yeah, that's the power of it. Yeah, the continuum hypothesis. There is something between infinites, right? There's something you can construct that's.
Yeah, I understand Reza's question better now, because the point he's saying is that from the standpoint of the inhabitant of a procedure, at every finite slice of the procedure, there is a predicate for it. So, for example, I'm part of a political movement. I go and meet people to talk about Maoism. Well, taken out of context as a photograph, talking to people about politics is something everyone does, right? Okay, and then we do something else. Well, that other thing is something everyone does as well. Not like alien moves, but the connection between those things, which are themselves finite and predicatable, actually boils down to a set that has no predicate in that situation. So locally, it looks like it's predictable, but predictable even, but on the whole, right, it doesn't. Well, but where does this on the whole, where is it seen from? It's not seen from anywhere. It's a wager, right? And then he says, okay, but can we have a rational theory of that wager? Yes, we can. If we use the generic forcing and so on, we can actually have a look at the inner machinery that is compatible with the theory of being, but that spells out what's going on in a process that has that structure. Locally.
And I'm saying that, exactly, I'm saying that philosophically, but what did Badiou do? Badiou did not create this wager. People have been doing this wager all throughout quote unquote human history. by inventing new things. They are making that way. All Badiou has done is to come up with a philosophy why this major has worked so far. And that philosophy, which is supplementing the theory of generic to that wager, is adding that condition from somewhere else, not from the procedures themselves.
Okay, but I just don't see how this, I have no problem with that, but but how does that concern some deficit in logics of worlds is something that I don't understand. Because in my opinion, the fact that he's very clear about the specific homomorphism that interests him in the theory of points, be functions that connect you to a sort of classical view of multiples, is a way of bringing you back to the theory of the generic that you find in being an event. And the only question that is left is, okay, but how is this appearing in a world? I understand that I'm diving into the multiple. I was listening to Ornette Coleman play the sax, or he was listening to somebody else play the sax, and he heard that there is information in the timbre that can be used musically. He is in the multiple when he says, inside this plane, there is something that doesn't exist but is, right? So the theory of how that thing that is but has no existence in the world will be connected to other things is given by the ontology of a generic multiplicity. The question left is, but how could Ornette Coleman have a bearing on this within the world of music? How could he follow this? How could he see something else and say this connects to that, or see these things did connect, right? And Badiou adds, look, the theory of points is totally compatible with this thing I'm calling a theory of body, which is a synthesis of the dependencies between appearance that is both a theory of appearance and a theory of singular connection, which is exactly what was missing. So he adds the missing block to a specific question. It's not a full recasting because it's the same machinery. You could ask the question formally, is this surjective homomorphism of points relevant to the theory of forcing? Is it compatible? Is there a way of rethinking the theory of inquiries as if it is a yes or no connection? Belongs or doesn't belong? And it turns out that it is. It's very much exactly how it is played out in being an event.
Yeah, at this point, I think I have a much clearer idea about my question about this. So if I want to give you an example, is within each truth procedure, no militant of that truth procedure has any idea that what he does is amounts to a truth or universal truth or anything like that. Is just a pure practice that basically they are trying to build more and more or build bodies or gather elements of a body through the practice of getting involved in their particular discipline. The fact that, and like we said, it is whether or not it yields to any result is unknown, is a wager. What Badiou has added philosophically to all this discussion is that this wager is not in vain. This wager is something that yields into what philosophically we call truth. And that requires you to adopt a particular orientation of thought in order to think that way, which has to do with maximality of thinking, so on and so forth, which is, to me, is the core of his Platonism. But there is nothing that is built from below that can give you the idea of truth. It is that condition that is added from the top. Now, in logics of words, there is nothing on the top, and he doesn't need anything from the top, because all the assumptions, all the addendums that he needs to make from the top is already made in being an event. So he doesn't need a phenomenological version of truth, because there is no phenomenology of truth, because truth don't appear in the world as truth. They appear as
body.
Pardon?
They appear as body.
They appear as a body. They appear as a never-ending project.
Yeah, okay. I would not go with the never-ending, but they appear as a project. I can agree with that.
They appear as a project, not as truth. So basically, 2 or 3 pages to exactly explain that would satisfy me.
Okay, I'm happy we went from 2 new chapters to 3 pages. I'm glad.
Well,
but you know, there's something to what you're saying that is actually, he wrote a whole book on it. Because immanence of, there's a third question we didn't address that is not addressed neither in Logics of Worlds nor being an event. Because being an event, as he puts it there, he's trying to say, under what conditions can we be sure that something can actually go beyond the encyclopedia, even though all that it's made of was discerned by the encyclopedia? How can that be? Is that thinkable? And he shows that it is. Then you can ask the question, but is it thinkable that this will leave actually a marking on appearance? So is it possible that, I mean, the property of not being predicatable in being an event, it's universality. That's the name of not having a predicate. If you have no predicate, but you're built out of a situation, therefore you're common to that situation without having no predicate, you're universal. In Logics of Worlds, the name of not having a predicate is singularity. Things that you look at them and you say, they cause things to happen, rather than the world causes things to happen. They're the singular source of something. That singular process there is doing something. It's not only being done by the regularities of the world. That's what the lack of predication is kind of supplemented by. So what is ontologically universal appears as singular. As you said, as a singular project. It doesn't appear as we're doing the common thing that commons with everything that is common.
It's always a singular project.
Yeah, but he's deducing why it's called a singular thing, right? He's deriving that singularity because it has a shape, it has a specific stuff, it has specific consequences and constraints. It's not merely the emergence of something universal out of things particular, right? So being an event, it's particulars versus the universal, and now it's the particulars versus the singular. But there's still a third question, which is not if this whole thing appears, does something of truth appear? Because there's still the problem, which is, great, truth appears as this body that contains organs that are treating things that have consequences, and this synthetic singularity, or this singular synthesis within a world, can only be supported by a multiple that is generic. You cannot have something singular in a world, truly singular, that appears as singular, that you cannot pinpoint in the world, in the structure of differences, the actual causes of its behavior, if you don't have a generic subset below supporting it. So the universal is an ontological support for the singular. But there's still a third problem, which is, yeah, but it appears in a sort of, as you said, always unfinished project. It seems like the emphasis on the side of appearance is on finitude versus the infinity, because it's always treating some parts of some multiples. So shouldn't this be thought of as an endless thing? And the very jargon of the end of the book goes against this, because he's not talking about the future. There is no future in Logics of Worlds. There is only the present, right? When you're doing some project, it's not about Heideggerian projection and anticipation of future and things like this. It's about opening up something that is happening here and now, right? So the question left is the question of, okay, but how does the infinite play into appearance? Or how does the infinite play into the sort of, how does it enter into dialogue with the particular? And I think that's the theory of the absolute, which is the issue. How the hell?
I haven't read that, but I think it does play in it quite a bit, because infinite has its trace not only from the top, which is the condition of thinking, which is the orientation of thought, that full commitment with the to the infinite is actually opening up venues for thinking in order to increase your ability to think about new possibilities. It is actually working from the bottom up too. I mean, the fact that this singularity can take place in a way that there is no predication is possible is because multiple is actually infinite, not in the way of our thinking is infinite, but it is in its being is infinite.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, but that's exactly the theme of the third book. The third book is exactly about the fact that, well, we treated predication in terms of particulars versus universal. Then in Logics of Worlds, we treated predication, as Dennis said, a sort of space of possible covers or compositional slices of the world versus the singular thing whose slicing principle is not of that world, right? It's not composed as objects are composed. And then this leads us directly to filters, because filters are totally amenable to treatment in terms of coverings and slices. And the problem is, if I can slice things in the way that bodies slice things, in the way that bodies separate regions, what does this say about the type of infinity I'm engaged in? So you have a local condition for discerning. If you're mapping the world in this crazy way, you must be dealing with something of a very high infinity. If you could map it on and have always some sort of central singleton for all the mappings, you would only be sure to have a lower type of infinity, right? So he again takes up the tension between predication and what falls out of the predicate to explore a third problem, which is what sort of infinity must you be in, right? Which is the absolute place. It's an infinity that is larger than the infinity of set theory, consistent set theory. It's not the infinity of consistent multiplicities. It's an inconsistent infinity. It's the very thing that was missing throughout the other two books, which seemed like the background of what is being counted into one. What is the place out of which situations come from? And you actually get to derive properties of this kind of class of infinity, because it's not a set, right? You get to derive properties from it through the ways that bodies supported by generic multiplicities get to slice situations and cover the world. Like, so it's a third question that also connects with this and brings the whole discussion on infinity back more clearly, like becomes a central discussion. But I think it's absolutely coherent with the principles of being an event. Like, I don't see why some new proposition is needed or is missing to make that connection coherent or consistent. I think it's missing.
I said, I don't know about the third book, but in this book, now we discussed, I think I feel a lot better, but only with the proviso to say that I need not to present a phenomenology of truth, because truth is an ontological addendum. Ontological addendum to as a supplement for the sureness of this wager.
But look,
I
for
did
example,
that ontological addendum in being an event.
Yeah,
now
but
I just have to show you how everything that is phenomenally contributes to the actual composition of a truth. How would they appear in the world?
yeah, but look at, I mean, I kind of agree with it, but I wouldn't go as far as saying there's no phenomenology of truth or whatever, because just take the following classic, beautiful example of, you know, Einstein comes up with a theory, it declares something very novel, and then this weird, I think he was Amish, Eddington, he even came to Brazil. In fact, he did 2 experiments, one in, I think, South Africa or some island near Africa, and one in Brazil. He showed that the curve of light actually, the light curves around the star.
Yeah, retrograde of Mercury.
Yeah, and then he says, oh my God, this is true. This appears as true. What is he saying? He's not talking about the being of it. He's talking about the very appearance that there is a envelope of that experiment by Einstein's theory, that they are compatible. That experiment treats for a specific path of light something in a way that's compatible with the provisions of Einstein's theory. He sees something of truth appearing. It's not the being of truth as an infinite set that appears, but is a dependence that can only be stated because something is true. So yes, truth appears. I mean, but you is a Hegelian in that point. It's just that I think it's an attempt to account for why when something is true is actually singular. You don't experience that as saying, aha, so now I know something about all stars. No, you need to see something singular to claim you saw something true. Why? It's so counterintuitive. You're listening to one piece of music and you say, oh my God, it's true, there is music that is not tonal. You need to listen to a specific piece of music. You cannot arrive at that without going through the singular for some weird, crazy reason, because it's true, it should be immediately accessible to everyone, but it's not. And the guy actually gives you the step by step the reason why the universal appears as the singular. So truth appears, but the appearance of truth is as the form of singularity, bodies and organs and so on. It's not it's not the being of truth as an infinite set that appears, right? And this is not because we're humans partial subjects for Badiou. It gives you an objective phenomenology of why truth appears as singularity for humans or not.
Yeah, I need to think about that piece. Anyway, I mean, I think this is an area that I felt would be the right addendum to the book.
No, but I agree. It's one of the most interesting things that we could go further into.
Yeah, I think one chapter that it doesn't have to be a long chapter, maybe not even a formal section, but one chapter that ties the end of being an event to the end of logics of words.
Yeah, I mean, this was a very nice, productive conversation around this very topic.
Actually, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up with the conclusion, I mean, you can even go as far as saying it's precisely because truth appears as singular and not universal that it is worth living, right? Otherwise, it's always already there. There's nothing to do, right? I mean, the very idea that singular processes are imbued with some truth value, right? In this very strong sense that he developed, it's precisely why it's worth living.
Yeah, ideas are always singular.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it is a strong, I mean, if we could go as far as what you said and suggest this is an addendum to the generic Korean thinking. Because you could simply say maximality of thinking, do whatever, right? But then he's saying, yeah, but this whatever is actually qualified by do real stuff, right? Do
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, the maximality of thinking is not really whatever. I mean, you have to make your presupposition explicit, right? Which are your axioms. And if those presuppositions are explicit, yes, you within the boundary of those presuppositions, you have to grapple with your real, which is the consistency of your theory.
Yeah, but I think that we now have a more meatier version of that, because ontology, it seemed like, well, let's just start games and try new stuff. Sure, but the world is what the world is, right? Something needs to appear from it, not outside. So that, I think it's like the maximality is now conjoined with a very strong feel for the interiority of something. Like, it's not interiority simply in the sense of a game is interior to itself, but in the sense of an immanent to a world, right? You do with the stuff that is there. I think that's what makes it singular. So you really get to praise the curvature of light of a star. Otherwise, it seems like you're comparing games and seeing which game has more expressive power.
Yeah, I think here, again, we can go back to this idea of, I think we can enrich the notion of space more here, because I think you have to be in the right place to encounter this singular thing. It's like, I think like for Badiou, space is not an even flat space. It's like warped, and only particular points in space have the connection, right, to the universal. So it's actually about finding, like, navigating towards those points. If you want to, like, for example, if you want to make new music, you can't just like start from anywhere, like, necessarily. You have to kind of go somewhere. And so I think there is some like practical tools we could talk about, like navigating through this space.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that the Logics of Worlds gives you a more, let's say, grounded, even pragmatic addendum to the maximality of thinking, or this idea of trust your axioms and follow the ones with most consequence. Because the idea of consequence here is grounded, right? I mean, ultimately, if I were to find one continuous thread throughout the book, is that it's the theory of dependence in Transcendental, the theory of localization and compatibility on objects, and all the way to the points. So it's all about also an immanent theory of consequence, like consequences that don't appear, but are thinkable, are not really thinkable, are not thought, right? They're thinkable, but they're not thought. So it is kind of a grounding of this axiomatic thing that could perhaps be very kind of in itself, right? Onto something which suddenly gets this sort of sense of, yeah, but the world is there.
Yeah, like a system of constraints, or passing constraints, as we were talking about, right?
Anyway, guys, I hope we can continue the discussion on our plenary or special meeting. But I'm so happy we actually went through the whole book. It was really, 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 really cool. I have to cook now, so I need to go. I need to pass on constraints from one. I need to actually do the spicy dish now that we discussed so.
Yeah, encounter the singularity of your dish.
Great.
Lucky meeting where you won't say the word dish.
Yeah. Always have to talk about food.
Yes.
Every meeting. That's a constraint.
Yeah, but usually I'm the only one eating.
Yes.
I'm sure you already noticed it.
We should collect all the images of you eating. That can be the picture of every meeting.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay,
I have to
so
run.
did we are we going to the next steps? We are going to discuss it in chats.
Yeah, I think we could just discuss through Messenger when we want to set the plenary, so we can actually have some concrete info to send La Zalamea, for example. And perhaps we can use the chat window to talk about what we want to present and just discuss.
Yeah.
JP, can you send me your email so I can forward you guys, all of you, the comments?
I'll put it right here, just a second. Actually, you are closing this window, right? I'll put it in the chat.
Great.
Okay, sounds good.
Easier.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys. See you later.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.